Hi there, this is Teri from Stamping Magic. Welcome back to my channel. Today's project is a fancy fold card. Now this card has many names, it appears. A Dutch fold, a double Dutch fold, a double Dutch gatefold, or a double Dutch door fold card, all of which I think are the same thing. My card today uses the gorgeous Good Morning Magnolia stamp set and coordinating Magnolia memory dies. I've also used the coordinating Magnolia Lane Designer Series paper. This is what the card looks like inside. And it can stand up in two ways. You can either bring the doors forward and have the centre panel hanging between them, or you can bring the centre panel forward in front of the doors, which is the look I prefer. I liked the look of this fold so much I had to make another card, and this time I used the beautiful large magnolia flower from the stamp set. Inside, this is what it looks like, and it can stand up in the same way, although that bottom leaf gets in the way a bit if you have the panel hanging behind the doors. There is one main difference between these cards, and that's how I created the centre panel piece. On the first card you can see the border is even all the way round, but on the second card the border around the pointed area is wider than on the sides. I am going to show you how I changed the shape of these today, but just briefly. If you want more detail, I will add a link to another video that goes into much more depth about these dies and how to change their size and shapes, and that'll be at the top of the screen. Okay, now to start with you need two pieces of card. I'm using Early Espresso. My first one measures 24.6 centimeters by 10.35 centimeters. If you're using standard card of 8.5 by 11, this needs to be cut to 9 inches by 4 3/16 of an inch. The second piece is as wide as your standard cardstock. So if you use A4, that's 21 centimeters. If you use 8.5 by 11 inch card, then it's 8.5 inches. It needs to be 5.1 centimeters deep, or 2 inches if you're using 8.5 by 11. If your standard card size is A4, you need to score the larger piece of card at 14.85 centimeters. If you use 8.5 inch by 11 inch standard card, then all your scoring can be done on the Simply Scored board. So if you use 8.5 by 11 as your standard card, you can score your larger piece in the Simply Scored board at 5.5 inches. You can also go ahead and score the smaller piece of card, and this needs to be at 2 1/8 of an inch from each side. If you use A4 card as standard, then you need to score the smaller piece using your metric plate, or you can use your trimmer to do this. Now on the metric plate you've got a marking at 5.25 centimeters, and you need to score it at that point on each side. You can then go ahead and fold on the score line that you made on the larger piece and burnish this with your bone folder. Now for the smaller piece, you just want to be careful that when you fold the sides inwards, that they actually meet in the middle. So don't burnish the folds until you're sure that they do so. You then just want to check that your band will go around the base of your card without any buckling at all. So if you put it into position and close the little doors, they should still meet in the middle and lie flat. If they don't, if they sort of buckle up slightly, or if there's a gap, then you want to take a slither of card off the edge of your main piece. You can then add glue to the center section of the band and position it onto the back of your main piece. This is the Good Morning Magnolia stamp set, and today I'm going to use the Hello sentiment, the smaller flower, and also this lovely ornate border. I'm starting with the flowers, and you need to stamp 3 of these. I'm going to use Memento Tuxedo black ink because I'm going to use my Stamping Blends alcohol markers to do the colouring. I'm also going to stamp the sentiment, and I'm using early espresso ink for this. Colouring these flowers is really quick and simple to do. I'm going to use petal pink for the actual petals, and I'm going to use mossy meadow for the leaves. Now I'm using the light petal pink first of all, and I'm just adding this towards the base of each of the petals. And I'm not being precise at all with this, I'm just laying down some colour and leaving the top part of each of the petals white. I will then switch to the dark petal pink, and I'm going to lay down some of this colour in exactly the same way, but I'm not taking it quite so far up towards the top of each of the petals. I'm switching back to the light petal pink now, and I'm just blending the 2 tones of the colour together. I'm using a similar 3-step method for the leaves as well. So starting with the light mossy meadow, I'm going to colour each of the leaves. And then I'm going to change to the dark mossy meadow and just add a little depth to each of the leaves. Mainly I'm following the lines already on the image. And again, to blend everything together, I'm just using the light colour once more. For the little wooden stems, I'm using the light and dark crumb cake. So starting with the light, then adding a little dark, and then just to darken it up a little more, I'm going to add a little dark soft suede before blending it all together with the light crumb cake again. I'm going to use one of the stitched nested label dies to cut out my sentiment, and this is 1 size up from the smallest. And then to cut out my flower, I'm using one of the Magnolia memory dies. I've used the largest of the stitched nested label dies to cut out an espresso mat, and then to cut out my designer series paper I've used the next size down. Now I'm not changing the shape or the size of the paper mat. You can see if I layered it as is, then I would get a wider border around the top and the bottom point compared to that I get on the sides. Now I want to even this up a bit, so I'm going back to the largest die, Now you can do this two ways. You can either line up the point of the die with the point of the cardstock and run that through your die cutting machine. Or if you want a closer even border all the way round, if you bring the point down just a little bit, just so there's a tiny bit of cardstock showing above the die, then that will give you that even border all the way round. So this is the piece that's actually removed. Now when you run it through your die cut machine, you just want to run that point through. You don't want to run the complete die through. Now this time when I line up my mat, you can see that the border around it is much more even. I'm going to use the Stamper Artist to stamp the inside panel. I'm going to place the stamp case under my acrylic plate to keep it level. This makes inking up your stamps a lot easier and a lot less messy. Now I'm going to do a dummy run, but I'm going to do this a little differently to what you've seen me do before. So I've placed my acetate sheet on top of my cardstock, and now I'm placing my stamp. And I'm going to deliberately place it wrongly. So I'm going to pick up my stamp and ink it up, and I'm going to use Early Espresso again. And then I will stamp it down on top of the acetate. Now you can see the position of that image is off compared to the cardstock. Now normally I would clean off the acetate, clean off the stamp, adjust the stamp, ink it up again and stamp it again, do another trial run. But what you can do, if you hang on to that acetate sheet so it doesn't move, you can use your other hand to move the cardstock underneath, and you can place it underneath the stamped image so it lines up perfectly. Now it took me a minute to do this because I didn't want to put my head under the camera, but I'm just making slight adjustments each time and then checking whether it's aligned correctly. And then once I'm happy, I can see that it's looking good at the moment. I can place my magnet back on my paper, on my cardstock, to hold it in place. I can clean off my stamp and my acetate. And then I can remove the acetate. Fresh ink on my stamp, and then stamp it straight down onto my cardstock. And there we go, I've got it central and where I wanted it to be. I've already created the little strip that will go on the bottom of this panel, and I've just used scraps of card and paper to do this. So it's not something I ever measure, the depth of it just depends on what I've got to hand. So I've used a little bit of petal pink and a little bit of the matching paper that I'm going to use on the front of the card. And I've layered the paper onto the petal pink card just so there's a little border showing of the petal pink on the top. And then I'm going to glue this to the bottom of my panel. And then this was a bit longer than I needed, so I can just cut off the excess. I'm going to layer this onto a petal pink mat. Now my white layer measures 14 centimeters by 9.5 centimeters, which if you're using standard card of 8.5 by 11, that will be 5.25 inches by 3 15/16 of an inch. The petal pink mat measures 14.4 centimeters by 9.9 centimeters, which for 8.5 by 11 cardstock is 5 3/8 of an inch by 4 1/16 of an inch. So these two pieces can be layered together, and then the completed panel can go inside your card base. I've already layered all my paper onto the relevant panels here. Now, the sizes you need for the designer series paper here, it's 9.6 centimeters by 9.1 centimeter, which is 3 15/16 of an inch by 3 1/4 inches. The petal pink card layer measures 9.9 centimeters by 9.4 centimeters, which is 4 1/16 of an inch by 3 3/8 of an inch. The paper for the little door panels measures 4.4 centimeters squared, or for the US it's 1 7/8 of an inch by 1 3/4 inches. The cardstock measures 4.7 centimeters squared, or for the US it's 2 inches by 1 7/8 of an inch. All these pieces can now be added to the front of the card base. The sentiment is glued flat to the card and positioned about halfway down the centre panel. I'm going to add the flowers down the left hand side, but before I place them I just want to shape them slightly, so I'm using my bone folder to do that. Just have to be very careful not to tear those stalks off. To help the flowers keep their shape once they're on the card, I'm adding a row of mini dimensionals just where you can see the dip in that flower, and then I'll use wet glue on the other areas of the flower. I'm going to work out where I want to position these first of all. I'm going to place the middle flower first of all, then it'll be easier to place the other two. Now I'm adding the wet glue at the base of the flower and on the stalk. Then I can do the same for the other two flowers and position them. On my original card I used some basic rhinestones, which I coloured using the dark Mossy Meadow Blends marker. And I'm just going to show you how easy it is to do this, just in case you haven't seen it before. So you just run your marker over the gem, and this dries within seconds, so you can use it straight away. Now for my new card, I don't think the green gems will show up so much, so I'm going to just leave them clear. I've added dimensionals to the top of that centre panel on the reverse, and I'm adding 3 more onto the base card itself. I've then removed all the backings and I can position my panel onto the front of the card base. And that's it, the card is now finished. So it will stand up both ways, but if you hang the panel behind the doors, you may find that the stalk of that bottom flower gets in the way, so I may trim that off later. I'll see. But this is how I prefer to display the cards anyway, with the panel in front of the doors. So here's another look at my original card. And then what is still my favourite of the three. I just can't resist that large flower. But which one do you prefer? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this project. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe and hit that notifications bell so you don't miss out on any future videos. Bye for now.